That's just a super brief introduction. John Lin is joining us. He's actually the recipient of the John Q. Haydock Award, which will be awarded this evening. So for a real introduction, you have to come tonight to hear all about John in the 3-minute video that is going to be preceding your award. But just briefly, John is an architect and a professor at Hong Kong U, and I believe just started the graduate program there. And it sounds fascinating, and I hope you can tell us a little bit about that today. John runs a kind of design research platform called Rural Urban Framework. And you did speak about it here a couple of years ago. It's a design practice that develops sustainable prototypes in villages in China and Mongolia, and in kind of rapidly developing urban areas. John was a student here at the Cooper Union in my time, back 25 years ago with Brad. And John was quite famous here, actually. He was the one student who was actually, he almost got a degree in engineering, then transferred to the School of Art, almost got a degree in the School of Art, and then came to architecture and completed his degree. I think he was here for about 15 years. You got your money's worth, yeah. But he was kind of legendary because he knew everyone in all the schools, all the faculty, the students. He were super well known. He does films, he does fashion. He's a real polymath and published a lot of books. We're going to see some of that today. And excited to hear from you. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
No, I don't know. My biggest memory of this room, honestly, is you'll remember with Remo Gudieri.
Yes.
And he would talk, and he would really just think, and he would smoke constantly. And then at some moment he would be like, "Okay, we need to take a smoking break." And we walk outside, and he would light up a cigarette. And I saw no smoking here, no smoking there, like no smoking Remo. You know, but no, thank you. It's great. I feel like today can be a little bit different from lecturing at other schools, you know, as we know each other so well. So today, I guess I could be completely honest in ways in which you cannot be really when you lecture. And it's please don't read that because you'll get a little bit depressed. But I flew in on Friday, and then I was at this opening of the if you guys, there's an opening at the Deitch Gallery, and it's a really good show. And I took these two pictures; they were right next to each other, and I realized the year which I graduated was the year of 9/11, and obviously this is the year of Trump, and it's exactly from when I graduated till now. And I was thinking about something where, you know, it's a funny thing because during 9/11, I did my thesis, and I think like half the students did towers, you know, and I look back and I think that's kind of funny that we still were like had this consciousness of like doing a tower, being optimistic as an architect, you know, and I think I very much believe the idea that you cannot make architecture pessimistically or cynically, let's say cynically, or I think it's much harder to do architecture cynically because you build things. And in many ways, when you do that and put that much effort in it, you have to have a kind of positivistic vision. But the world has changed a lot. So when I graduated, it was this kind of like height of neoliberal economic policy, you know, a lot of like real estate development. I didn't understand that at the time, but there was like a very comfortable time for architects, I think. There was a lot of jobs going around. Now, and, you know, I work and live in Hong Kong, you know, I think real estate is down. All the students are like, where are we going to get jobs? And, you know, neoliberal policies are, in many ways, have been kind of debunked. If they haven't created the kind of, you know, equality and diversity that was promised. I read this a couple days ago. So these are just kind of very unusual coincidences. I like this writer, Yukui, and he coins another term of planetarization as a kind of new way to think about pluralism. It's a critique of globalization. And in many ways, why I'm showing all this is because I think this is a very interesting time to be an architect, you know, to graduate and not have a job, and to, in many ways, struggle to define your role in society. And one of the things is I heard your thesis students, so it's not to scare you, but my thesis for the last 20 odd years has been very simple, which is to find ways of alternative practice. Like, how do you make architecture? How do you arrive at architecture, but through other means? And I have lots of different examples. I'm not going to talk about the architecture. Okay, first confession is that I never wanted to be an architect, and I'm still on the fence with that. And I honestly, I don't even like buildings that much, okay, to be honest. Many other forms move me a lot more. But the process of building, I have found to be one of the greatest kicks that you can have because you just can't do it yourself. It takes enormous energy, enormous resources, and it's something I almost tired of, but not quite. And as we get through this talk, or some sort of talk, we will pass through like three midlife crises, which I had, which are like defining moments, architectural midlife crises. I'm sure maybe many of you have had them yourself. This is when I came to Hong Kong. It was almost immediately after graduation. And the story really begins about 40 years ago with a Deng Xiaoping and Margaret Thatcher. It's a combination of two very different systems, you know, socialism and capitalism. And it creates a very interesting condition. I zoomed in on this photo because I feel like we can almost see that there's a bit of a skepticism whether neoliberal economic policies are going to work. These are wax figures, by the way, and they have them in many places. This is like in many places in China, they have this. So it just as an introduction, it created, in a way, very unusual situation. So they needed workers to build the cities. So Deng Xiaoping, you know, oh, that was Deng Xiaoping, sorry, earlier. They needed workers to build the city. So people went to the cities, to farmers, villagers went, and but they sent the money back home, and they started to build a lot in the villages. And so it's very unusual that as the population's going down, everyone's going out of the city to work. Actually, the architecture, you know, density is just going up. At the same time, they leave and they commission other people to build houses. And so you have this kind of very generic form of housing, while family structures are rapidly changing. So, you know, I've heard stories of like one brother who stays back and takes care of his other, you know, three brothers' families. So you have also this kind of breakdown of or transformation of what it means to have a family, what it means to have like a livelihood. And this is related, of course, to architecture. So the traditional architecture no longer fits. And this is, you know, sort of where I came in. I brought a stack of books. And I was thinking I can just pass them out one by one. This is an old one, but so that's this phase of the work. I kind of want to get through it. This was the first thesis. When we started to make projects, it was a geopolitical project, actually, because we were in Hong Kong and the Chinese government had just started their 9-year education program. So they wanted to build schools and they wanted somebody to fund them. So in some ways, they were encouraging charities in Hong Kong. There was tons of charities who were then sending money back and building lots of schools. But if you know how charities work, well, people donate money, they want to donate it to bricks and they want to have every brick accounted for. So there's no space for design. But after, you know, building hundreds of them, you know, the first charity I worked with, they kind of started to think about maybe there were better ways or other ways to do it. And I was teaching at the time. So we set up Rural Framework because I have done commercial work. Rural Framework is a nonprofit. So it's like an NGO because I just figured, if you start by not making any money, at least you don't lose money. So that seemed like a pretty good deal to me at the time. And so we were sort of taking advantage of the fact that we could offer design services. We could work with charities who had funding for buildings and then governments who had funding for infrastructure, other charities who gave educational programs. And suddenly we realized there was no single client. And this was quite interesting for me, is not to have a client or not to have a single one, where suddenly the role of the architect gets more complex and starts to negotiate and navigate between these competing agendas. And that model, in some ways, is the way I've tried to work for 20 years, and it keeps evolving. So each time I'll sort of discuss a little bit how it's evolved. And that's where you could say the gist of the core of the creative process goes into leveraging funding, leveraging all sorts of things, infrastructure, programming, and buildings themselves. Okay. So we built a lot of different places. This was the first phase. I'm not going to talk about these. We did a lot of buildings. We thought about them as prototypes. All right. This is what happens when things accelerate and transform very rapidly. You get super modern high rises, traditional fabric, infrastructure, agricultural ground colliding. And in my most recent work, I've shifted from we were doing buildings and trying to make this generic concrete frame systems better, more tailored made to the environment, to the program. And we always try to avoid this other stuff because it just seems messy. You can appreciate it, but it just seems like too complicated. These kind of very traditional systems seems a bit nostalgic. Now I'm really into that because China right now, I think is very interesting. I'm going to show this project. Okay, and now I'm just going to talk over it. Oh, very loud. Sorry. Uh-oh. Can you hear me if I... So I've been doing a very unusual project. First of all, China is faced with cheapest high technology. So it's readily available. And at the same time, there's these big pockets of tradition that are slow to develop. How do these things come together rather than thinking about it as collection? How do we make things of that? So this is that nice house. You'll see him singing later. But this project took place under COVID, essentially. So we couldn't go there. I had the misfortune of being forced into my teaching team. A kind of technology person, a kind of robotic researcher. I don't know if you work in like big universities, there's like different species. You've got the robot tech people, and you have like the social people. You have a little bit of this. Somehow we sort of developed an idea for doing it remotely. We went and had some funding, all students, we scanned 100 units. And we said, why don't we get these processes? So for me, it's an interesting process because this project was done almost without any drawing. And architecture drawing it's also very complicated. The drawing, it worked for clients and developers. The drawing is kind of legal document. So it's a kind of agreement. You can't really change it. You can't even change something that's legalized. the robot is just completely so. This is probably how much sense I get. And no, it's okay, it's okay. I'll just talk over it. It's okay. I think the other videos are less noisy, but you can take a part of wooden house one day because that's somehow the unique aspect of this traditional architecture. So not looking at anything else, anything done with data. So we scan it, or you send digital files, and then you design with new extensions in the house, and courtyard, the total idea that we can build tons of them. Same plot. One of the wonderful things about 3D printing, it's the whole it's one of the poorest model anymore. Every single one really different and at the same cost. So the idea was to take it apart, print the new walls, and just put it back together. One of the things I quite appreciate about it is that there's this whole concern that technology is going to replace the human. Sorry. Wanted to find a way to bring them together. So the whole village is still doing the tiling as an effective, community. And we're also able to update and manage. So this is the first experiment. This is a very recent one. And that was a few years ago. And that story begins with kind of midlife crisis, which is, let's see, Nora will appreciate this. When a dream you have turns into a nightmare, that usually happens when you get like a dream project or a really big project. And I had the opportunity to work for Ivanka, which is a really good developer in China. They did all the Stephen Hall projects, and I thought this is going to be fantastic. I don't know if I should. I think we have a little time. I'll tell you the whole story, which is I think it's interesting. It was interesting for me because we had to do a big underground shopping mall, and week after week we went in. Now, wanted to do. You have to do structural things to bring in light. This was a fantastic problem. And they kept saying, this is just too expensive. This costs too much. This costs too much. So it's kept getting shut down. So in the end, it became a very kind of solo-wit, very simple structure. And then it came to materials. And I thought, okay, well, we'll do some very austere materials, brick or stone, lava rocks. And they kept saying, this is too cheap. No, you're not spending enough money. And it was really a surprise because there's this kind of formula that they go for. So I had to give up the remainder of my fees in order that they can take my name off the project. So I basically paid to have this hidden project, this hidden underground mall in China, in Shenzhen. That's the Banca R&D. And so I paused on doing architecture because things had just grown. The practice was growing. It was a cute baby shark, but now it was this kind of monster that you had to feed all the time. And I went back. I'm always very interested in Rudolphsky. I'm going to go forward and go back. I found this picture in the library here at Cooper Union, just randomly looking through, Architecture Without Architects. You guys know this book? It's a nice book because very little text, like most pictures. And this is this amazing image, which I started to get very interested in the figure of Rudolphsky. Oh. And this is actually part of an exhibition that's going to be in the Biennale this year. It's about the whole story of the person who took that photo and the transformation of this house. Actually, this was Rudolphsky's second exhibition, Art Close Modern, at the MoMA. The first one, he was as an architect, a Brazilian. He was living in Brazil. But that preceded the really well-known one, Architecture Without Architects. And this is his final one. It's never been translated into English, but if you speak German, yeah, you could almost translate it as from the art of building to the art of living. And there's this kind of trajectory, this kind of, you know, between being really interested in buildings and being much more, interested in living. That really started when he's like looking at all the clothes and he's kind of also into like puritanical attitudes, was very critical. But I thought, I want to go and find the site of this photo, and see what it is. And I found it. And this is what I found. Um, I will pass this out because it ends up with this book, actually. People building their houses above ground, factories, more or less interwoven between the underground houses. The factories are owned by the villagers. It's like a Taobao village, if you've heard of that. So it's kind of village as a kind of economic model, which is kind of interesting. And then I thought to start to go around China and find more examples. So this is from the catalog of Architecture Without Architects. And in many ways, I thought it's interesting because he calls it, non-pedigreed architecture, but he says it could be called vernacular, anonymous, spontaneous, indigenous, or rural. And these mean very different things. And I wanted to review the book, not looking at the buildings because they're very powerful, compelling forms, but to look at them as design processes, as their collective design processes, for instance. The spontaneous is a kind of interesting one, so they're not necessarily planned, or the design and building process is kind of, interlinked. And it just kind of turned a little bit, how we think professionally and how, architecture works professionally, as I was describing the drawings and this sort of, anticipation of a finished product. So I was very interested in this rereading. So this is a picture from, and I started an exhibition where I tried to compare images from his book and the text. And this is, so these are the nomads. He kind of appreciates them. This is Ulaanbaatar, a site of another project that we started to work in. That is the city back there. But basically, 80% of the people live on 60% of the land. And that's called the Ger district. And you see all the Mongolian huts. It's because the one resource they have is land. So any Mongolian could come to the city and register and get 700 square meters of land. All you had to do was build a fence around it. So it looks like a shanty town. I mean, the fences are, just whatever they can find. And it slowly builds up, and there's no infrastructure. It looks like a city, but it's kind of a slum. So I don't want to talk about that now, but this is in southern China. The idea of like fishing villages where the boats are just tied together. So they become public spaces because you sort of go onto other people's boats to go to your own boat. This is a floating village. The exact same site in southern China is now looks like this. It's because instead of fishing, they do fish farming, and they developed their own ways of making architecture. So they reinvented the vernacular system. There's a floating China mobile shop. There's floating kindergartens. I found this quite inspiring. This is a Japanese example. And I had a studio some years back, and one of my students found this on Airbnb. And so it's these different collisions of livelihood. It's also, collisions between industrialized materials and, this straw thatch, which is a kind of, it requires the village to come together. Different collisions in terms of forms of production. These are the Tulos. These were not in Rudolsky's book. He never went to China. But if you go back there now, it looks like this. So I will tell a little bit about the story of these Tulos. It's a very interesting, I think, urbanization story, but or essentially, they were fortresses. But then as the area got dense, the inside of these tulos, we call them, these collective houses, one would have a school that others would go to. Another one might have a temple and another a marketplace. This is actually three tulos that I've documented. And so it was like this kind of proto-urbanism. And they started to have relationships between them. I was very interested in what happens now where people build their own houses all around, and then the tulo becomes abandoned in the sort of void space. So that's a project I'll show later. But it's kind of reversal of the public and the private. And then if you go inside them, everyone wants a toilet and a kitchen. And so they just subdivide it and build into this sort of common space. Well, that's where I got reinterested in the idea of being an architect, because it seems to me in a very simple way, that's the kind of thing that an architect could renegotiate and find ways where you balance very simply the sort of collective space with this kind of need for common facility. So, maybe the role of the architect could now be defined as somebody who could navigate this kind of evolution of tradition where architecture and livelihood were always together. And then with this rapid development, they kind of got, a little bit disengaged, and to begin to connect these back together. And the latest few projects that I've been doing deal with this issue and try to explore it from different aspects. So this is with also another classmate of mine, Sony. So I work with a lot of classmates who are with me in Hong Kong. I guess he's in Swarthmore now. And that's the book. We decided basically to do a book documenting this. So I'll just go through this very quickly. So, there's a book. And I don't want to, I have a lot of other things to show. We went to these underground houses, and when we went, we met this family, this couple, who had built a house above ground. But then they were still moving underground in the summer and the winter because it was like warmer and cooler because of the thermal comfort of the earth. It was very simple. It was a kind of, approach to comfort, sustainability, but not purely through technology, but through like lifestyle changes and lifestyle transformation, adaptation. So I started to document more of these. I mean, this is this amazing collision. You see the housing, and then you see the underground houses down there. I'll show a project. This is a drive-in one where they opened a restaurant, and then you could then just drive your car. This is kind of interesting because when the government builds a highway, the earth is quite soft, so they actually cut down about 4 meters. And so everyone sort of just excavates their home. But this home opened up a shop in the front. So it's both, like domestic living, and then there's this kind of, shop front. And they just take advantage of that road, but they kept the earth. And from the inside, you have this weird window. But then when you look in the courtyard, it's truly, like an underground house. It's very protected. It's a very unusual combination. In another side, with these wooden houses, the highway has to be built 4 meters above the ground. It's a kind of wetlands. So if you see the writing, it's because they took the house apart, they numbered every board, and they just kind of built this thing, reconnected it, and built it back. And an entire house can fit on the back of a truck. So I was quite interested in maybe there's these kind of unusual, not revolutionary advantages, or that's where it led to the project I just showed you. And so they're recycling all the time. And we talk about recycling, but they're recycling the wood, combining it with concrete structure. lots of opportunities, but also opportunities. I mean, probably you might detail this better. Not me, I'm very bad at detailing, but some of you, I'm sure. Um, just wrapping a wall around it, and then the space between the wooden house and then the concrete wall becomes a stair. There's a kitchen, or rebuilding it on top of the two-story concrete house with everyone expanding upward. All right. The tulos. The problem with the tulos is expansion. So families live in a vertical stack because you defend your section of the wall. So that's kind of how they work. But when the family grows, it's very hard to, expand, sideways. So sometimes they just literally plug in from the outside. And this door takes you from the private house to the sort of collective environment. So, if you think about collective housing, somehow as a model, they become quite interesting, I think. Also, the variations and how they do this. Like this one looks like this from the outside because it's completely built inward. It's really urban on the inside of this tulo. And I see this as contemporary diagrams. And so that's why in the book that I pass around, the drawings are very sort of austere, and they're like black and white, and it's just the old part and the new part. How do we learn from this? And this was, of course, the spirit of Rudolsky. This is Six Brothers. Okay, this is the last example. It's in this seasonal house. This is in Shangri-La. This is the first house that this was originally just an earth house. It's a Tibetan community, and this family just literally chopped it in half and exposed the wooden structure on the inside, and they have this kind of sunroom. And it's weird because if you go to Shangri-La, it's very dangerous to drive around at night because all the animals are black. Like the cows are black, the pigs are black, the birds are black, and it's because of the climate. But I mean, they're just like invisible. So we're just crashing into these black, yaks and things. And I'm doing a research now on this as a kind of transformation. It's not just a kind of tectonic material transformation, but as a kind of environmental strategy. So it has gone from what used to be a earth, city, very, I don't know, heavy, dense, opaque. And now everybody has built these glass volumes around their houses. And there's a whole industry, a whole local industry that has been created and making it cheaper and cheaper. So we're also looking at, the first time they started to do it and then how they sort of developed this technology. There's a city of glass. At night, it lights up. It's quite magical. I'll skip through a few of these, but there's then this adaptability, the glass and the curtains, the openable windows. This is a friend of mine. This is one of my favorite house. He's a businessman / gangster, and this is the outside of his house. So it's not earth, but he rents this. He rents all those rooms on the outside. And his entrance to his house is in this little door. It's very discreet. And when you come in, you hear this kind of sound of water. And then you see it, and he has this little, and it's like, the myth of Shangri-La. It's completely hidden. We call this the hidden house. He has these big chandeliers. And in the morning, he starts his morning here. There's this kind of glass floor. I think before Yang Ho Cheng did that. He just did it by himself. Spends his afternoon here playing mahjong, and people come and visit him. Politicians, other businessmen. But then the entire family gathers in this one room in the evening. And there's this great stove that you can cook on and have tea. And it's like he has an incredibly modern life somehow, and also very traditional. There's 4 generations, and they all gathered here. And I was very interested how these things aren't really contradictions. And these people have found ways to sort of bring it together. Rudolsky calls it the untutored imagination of the self-builder. And so this was for me a kind of re-education. And then I started to slowly get back to making architecture. This is, I think I showed this project last time. So, I don't even remember it either. Now there's the volume. Okay, so I will talk about funding, okay? Because basically money is the thing. When we started to go to these places, we thought, as teachers, wow, it's getting expensive to travel there. What should we do? Well, we should bring students. Then it's free. So we bring students, it's a great education. Let's go to the Tulos, and we see all the grand Tulos. And then the next year, you kind of get bored, and then you find, oh, there's some weird damaged ones. But they're really interesting. And that's how this thing happened. So we started to have studios. And because of that, we got in contact with the government. And because we started to have this relationship with the government, then I started to document the other Tulos, the damaged ones. And out of that came a research grant, to look into these and say, okay, there's some kind of intelligence that's useful. So then from the research grant, we got to do some small projects. This project is funded by the Jockey Club. So the Jockey Club runs all the gambling in Hong Kong. It is the biggest charity. It's kind of brilliant, actually. It's a kind of weird feedback loop, and they are the biggest charity in Hong Kong. And they, again, will fund students to go and do activities. Then we got some possible materials. This is not the most beautiful Tulo, but they were already starting a school there. And for me, that showed a certain kind of initiative. So then we did the plugin, which was like another outdoor classroom and the library. But the door is very small. I didn't want to expand the door, so you kind of have to you kind of come in there and you kind of crawl in. It feels like you're sneaking in through the window. And then there was a big one, 4 stories, and they wanted to do something, but there was nobody had rented it. It was abandoned. And so they hoped by building something there, they could attract funding. So eventually we did a sale. Of course, there's a spiral stair because, it's like a 300-year-old structure. You cannot put any weight on it. So the stair is the scaffolding. It kind of builds itself. And then the connections are cantilever. We try to create a different spatial experience of the Tulo from the center. Okay. So I just want to show you what happened to it now. So this is a year later. Someone sent this to me. And apparently, Mao had visited this Tulo and hidden in one of these secret rooms. So the Tulo, they have these weird secret rooms. And they have turned it into a museum of they call it red tourism history. So there's a lot of stuff. I'm going to show you a picture which I can't show in China. So I'm actually really excited about this. So they have all these activities and stuff, and it's okay, I feel that what's important here for me is the process in which the architecture, connects and leads to something else. I was not allowed into this room, but this is inside the Tulo. It's a recreation. I mean, we're really into wax figures, I think. It's like in a photo, it's not enough. You really need to, kind of feel that this meeting is taking place. So this is one of the key meetings of the Communist Party. Um, uh, Outsiders are not allowed to visit. Okay, so this is the latest project. So I told you that I had done this project with another teacher collaborator that works on robotics. Oh, I'm going to explain this image. This guy lives in a village where the government had moved out all the villagers out of this underground houses. And they had built new houses, but there was no electricity. So he was just kind of wearing these, headlamps. And this is the museum for the underground houses. Okay. Um, the story is that after doing all the research, and then we were doing a film, we've interviewed several people in the village. Back in 2021, there was a massive rainfall. So it is climate change. And these underground houses can sustain a certain amount of rain, but not this much. So all of them became flooded. And then there was this big crisis. They all had to move out. So we came in, and here was an opportunity to begin to renovate one of them. And we got some funding from a donor. But the idea was that since it's a private house, that they should contribute something back to the community. So it's for community events like weddings and funerals. We call it like the Red White program. And we basically, this is how they do the modern one. It's a very beautiful process. So each step of the way deals with a kind of different researcher technology. The bricks, they almost don't use any scaffolding. Originally, it's like a thin bamboo post, and they tie all these strings with bricks hanging on it. So the pressure of the bricks that are hanging, allow you to basically build this arch. And then, of course, the arches are crisscrossing. Anyways, as I said, I'm not going to talk about the architecture at all, but essentially, I worked with one very difficult architect. So I thought this time around, I'll work with two very difficult architects. And I invited my friend and colleague, Olivier Altever, who you guys also remember, not as being difficult. And then they were fighting all the time, so I could step out of it and manage the project. This was interesting. One of the best moments is this stove that they have where you light it and the temperature rises, but then each of them is a slightly different temperature, so you cook different things. It's quite beautiful. This is the Chinese stove is a kind of recent grant that we're working on to do an exhibition. But then we incorporated it into the 3D printing, and I thought that was quite nice. And this is what it looked like originally. This is Olivier's model, which he built himself with some kind of net pantyhose, So he hasn't changed one bit. And then I've done a book here, and it's called Uncertainty. It deals with looking back at another set of projects. So all the projects that I'm showing involve students in some way, as bait or as labor, or I'm sure they get something from it as well. But it's something that sort of begins a little bit with this drawing, which you'll know is from Scarpa, and it's the small chapel in the Castel Vecchio, and it's just drawing for it. And I always thought it's very beautiful because it shows a certain kind of, I don't know, indecisiveness or ambiguity. I was told that it's because he didn't want to control everything. So we had an Italian on our team, and then she translated all the comments. And it turned out he was completely like a control freak. like complete control freak. So just like every other architect. But I still thought the story is nice. And he talks about tolerance in it. And in these projects, it's really about building in like a sense of tolerance, a sense of flexibility within the design and the construction. So this is after an earthquake. So it's actually one of my favorite projects because it was done with the least amount of money. It's like 5,000 euros, which is, I don't know how much US dollars is that? Like 200? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So like your monthly salary. I don't know. But yeah, it's not much, right? These people were living in these tents for up to a year. It was in Yunnan. And we came in and we had donations to do a library. And they took us to a site and they said, you know, there's these empty sites. But we quickly realized we couldn't make a building from ground up. But the government had built a big plaza as a kind of, you know, sort of, okay, we're rebuilding your village. So they built a big empty concrete plaza with the basketball courts. And we saw the wall, which was now 4 meters, this retaining wall. We thought, if we just build the roof, then we have the floor and the wall solved. So it came sort of naturally out of this process. So, you know, we detailed it so that they could draw it directly on the ground. And it's 17 trusses that are built in very rudimentary ways. And it starts off like this, a door. And then it eventually expands into like a 6 meter high room. But it's a bridge, so you can come down from it. You can sit on it to watch the basketball games. It's packed into this tiny structure. It's a piece of furniture. It's a playground. You know, we got a little bit more money to get books, and then we of course used it on wood to hang the books. It's all just, I think, about leveraging funding. So it has many different personalities, and yeah. So when the governor came for the celebration and he saw it, he said, "This is brilliant. You guys did this library as an open book." You know, he was like, "That's great." And I said, "Yeah, well, of course he did. You know, of course. That's our, you know, and I think that's, I don't know. I think the story is also very important. And, you know, the idea that the architecture is also a part of this larger story that other people can buy into. Okay, so we did other structures of the suite. This one is also after an earthquake. It was this idea that you would use the top and the bottom. There used to be a little market here along the highway, which had been destroyed, and then you could sit here and sort of eat your lunch. And this led to another project where we developed this, and you'll see it's like, Corp has this like little great diagram of the day and night, just kind of branded it somehow. But I think he also did it in his last house. And it became the scaffolding for this project. So we kind of adapted it. And so these projects kind of lead to other projects. So this is with Olivier. This is actually his research, which was into like fabric casting with bamboo and fabric, because bamboo is, it's a weird material. It's like really big on one end, really narrow on the other end. It has all these ridges on it. So it's very hard to work with. But then he was very interested in, just putting fabric in between. And we did a hotel in this town. This is the workers. So it's like the large end to the small end, and everybody smokes. It's and then what you saw in the beginning was like taking the formwork off. And it's quite beautiful. You really feel you can see all the ridges of the bamboo. adds certain quality to it. That's very nice. This is why we smoke, because of the air. It's much cleaner smoke. Yeah, so this is the hotel. This is the only commercial project to show you. We reuse everything. Like that bar is all the tiles from the hotel that they had dug out of the ground. Okay, how am I for time? What time did we start? Yeah, let's skip to a few. We even did a like swing foot, the same thing. It's kind of cool. And Olivia wasn't interested in the houses because they were not funky enough, so then I did a lot of the hotel rooms. But it was incremental. You know, it was like we did this without anyone really knowing how to do it. So we had this series of incremental prototypes. China's in kind of a nice sweet spot because there's growing regulations. You know, not as much regulation probably as we have here, and we just try to find a little bit these gaps in between. And this is the most crucial person in the design process because he was the guy who owned the donkey. That it's a very steep site. I mean, we were really like, and then it was very hot, so he would just cover his body in mud, and he delivered all the concrete to the houses with this donkey, the donkey power. Okay, this is a hospital project, but I think I'm gonna skip this. Okay, this is a recent one that's not yet finished. It started when Xi Jinping said that, okay, we cannot have any more weird architecture. So this is an architecture that tries not to be weird. That is,
When was that declaration?
2014. Yeah, that's when we started this project. It's still ongoing. We did a lot with materials. It's a cultural center, so we develop all the materials in the village, essentially, and you had to get there. I don't think I have time for that. This is it. This is 17 buildings. It's like archive, library, auditorium, museum block. The kind of materials will go on the outside of that. Sports. And recently I went there just on an afternoon, and it was amazing. This is not finished yet. After Aston Houses, I got a grant from the Grant Foundation to do a film. So for the last 4 years, I've been making a film from the book. And the filmmaker said, let's go see it. And on a random Tuesday afternoon, we saw this guy who comes there every day with his friend. And the reverberation apparently is really good off of and then we also went behind the building, and then there was these guys who would come here to practice. And so it's kind of auditorium that's not yet finished. This sort of takes care of itself. People start to use it in various ways. This is the auditorium. It's designed to have two enclosed auditoriums. Here and here, they're connected. The stage is in the middle. But what we wanted to do was to be the bottom, so it's a mirrored public sort of auditorium, because we know that there's a lot of this kind of community dancing and having different kinds of activities. So you see it here, it's completely open underneath. It's an informal auditorium underneath the formal one. This is the lobby. And this is the library. It's done with the factory, these, I don't know if you do this in the US, these kind of concrete pipes that you have for like drainage or like building cities. So we have them make them a little bit lighter, thinner for the facade, and it's a public. The books are on the inside, and there's kind of street on the outside. It's four different buildings connected underground, so it's a single library with four different buildings. It's not yet open. It's not yet complete. We've had the third change of mayor so far, which is, I don't know, exhausting because each new mayor wants, to put their mark on it. So, and I've been discussing with them, how we can finish this and saying, it will be a shame. All these people are already using it. And they said, okay, but we have a really good idea. Because, a library doesn't generate any income. And honestly, not many people are reading books. Would it be possible to turn this into karaoke parlors and bars? And, and you know what I said? I said, that's a great idea. So now finally we are picking up the project. It kind of works because as you can see, it has all these smoking balconies, and you have all the stairs where these kind of the reading rooms are along all these stairs. So the connections in and out of the facade. It's very, very simple. And we really do things with very little budget. Structurally, it's quite simple. And it also works because there's an LED company that is sort of putting LED lights into all the little circles. So it's like a kind of giant pixelated television. So I'm interested in this thing, this kind of like, my thesis, maintaining a kind of indecisiveness or ambiguity or uncertainty, and trying to bring that into the process of building and designing architecture. Everybody gets their kicks from something. Okay, two more quick projects. This is a village about a year ago. 6 months later, it's like this. And then 6 months later, it looks like this. But this is a kind of problem that we always try to deal with. And I tried 4 times. But the problem is that everybody will always want the biggest piece of land or the biggest house. And it will look like this. There's no way around it. That's democracy, to tell you the truth. So, I find that we are working under an authoritarian government, but we really, employ democratic processes. The village is the most democratic layer. You can actually elect your leader. But there's also this kind of issue with the collective. Now, in this case, we did do a brand new village. And that was because it was after the Great Sichuan earthquake in 2008. And it was really a horrible, tremendous tragedy. And this village, the government had built houses. A year later, not even a year later, before they moved in, the heavy rains came and all the houses collapsed because they had just built them so fast. And this was happening in quite a lot of places. And when the earthquake happened, I have to say that I stayed away because I just felt that the conditions for what they needed, to rebuild as quickly as possible were not the conditions, or I could not really contribute to this. That's not, I'm trying to design, and I didn't feel like there was a problem I could contribute to, rather go there and clean up bricks. But a year later, the Habitat for Humanity came to me and they said, look, this has happened. There's no funding. The government's exhausted, so we're going to get it. And we said, if we're going to build it, let's try to make it a model village. Let's try to work with the villagers. And so participation for me means I found the most effective is to use actual architecture, to bring models in which we kind of tear them up. We kind of the villagers draw on them, they destroy them. The research assistants cry. it's part of the process. And it's very dense because the government had then put in money to put very deep piles in the ground. So the available land for building was very tiny. So we had to squeeze 21 houses, and the distance between the houses was only 3 meters. It became essentially like a very urban village, but in a kind of totally rural setting. And this idea of the roof was a very simple idea to allow in more light. They had even wanted to flatten it, and it was always about this argument of, light and ventilation, and they had little courtyards. So we had many different options for how much green. At first, it was just like a little garden, and then we realized all the villagers wanted the maximum amount of green because even though they have collective land for planting, they only have a very little land or no land for their own crops. So this was a way that they could earn extra income. So it quickly became an entire landscape. We opened up the ground floor, and it's kind of this weird planted landscape, and people plant like different things that either they use themselves or they sell. And then this was a community center. There was another charity coming in. These projects were very slow. And this is another thing where 10 years later, the government went to celebrate the rebuilding after the Sichuan earthquake. And this was not part of it, but then this became one of the feature villages for that. And it's because it took time. All right, this is the last thing I want to show before we. Oh, I forgot to say, you can interrupt me at it. We are friends. But all right, I want to show you my most prize-winning project last. And with the filmmaker a couple years ago, he said, "Let's go see it." I said, "Wow, I don't even know where. I think I know where it is." So then he made a little trailer about it, and I'll just let you watch it, and then after this, I can maybe discuss. But it's great. So I'll tell you a little bit about the film, though. It's counter to the book. The book, we purposely said, let's make the architecture of the buildings, the characters. So there's only one person who shows up in the whole book, this old lady, because we just loved her so much. But the rest, we just didn't want to show any people. We wanted to focus on the architecture. This film is a series of house tours that myself and the filmmaker, we go and we actually visit every family, we interview them. And basically, for this project that actually had won a few prizes, nobody knew anything about it. Like, nobody had heard of it. It was only like 40 minutes away, but it took 3 hours to find it. We went to the government and with random people, we showed them photos. Right, that's quite funny. But yeah, I know. It's actually quite horrible to make a film with the filmmaker and then you get in the crossfire. He tries to capture. Okay. And all the times, like I told you so. So you're doing the other side. Yeah. Something like New York City cab drivers, you're kind of paying them by the minute. So I don't know. I just suddenly realized that. after coming to New York. You guys should. So we finally arrived at this house. And it's completely abandoned. And essentially, we had to break into the house. It was a really interesting lesson. They told me the car had backed into the wall. So it was not the architecture. The architect at fault. Was, but I did learn a few things from this. So basically, this was my first house I had the opportunity to design, and there was a charity, and we went to this village, and they said, "Well, look, the villagers want that we build a pipe from the water reservoir because they don't want to pay for water, and I said, we're going to come here and just help them steal water." So they didn't think that was a good idea, and I said, "Hey, let's build a house because it's very dry, but it does have this kind of rainy season. So what if the house was this kind of model house which started to collect water?" And we built in all these different systems. We worked with the local university, this kind of biogas system, the con where the smoke goes, from the cooking stove into the bed. But we had all the means. So there were literally no restrictions. And so I didn't have to make any compromises. And we had never thought about one problem, which is who's going to live in it after we're done. And after we had built this beautiful house, we said to the government, "Okay, well, why didn't you choose a family?" And the donor said, "Okay, choose 3, and we're going to pick one." So they chose 3 families. We interviewed each one, and family A had like 5 other houses. So family C is fantastic. We're going to pick family C. And then a month later, come back and family C doesn't really want to live there. They don't like your house. Really? Okay, so we'll pick family B. Okay, family B. A month later, family B really doesn't like your house either. They thought about it. It's just, and there's animals in the house and everything. And then the charity said, "No, there's obviously something's going on." And then we had the charity came in. It's the largest women's charities and I knew this fantastic woman in the sort of government who's running it. And then there was a place for sort of women in need, that they would be able to house there. And then the donor, the daughter was married to a designer, and they wanted to help them develop crafts. I mean, you've heard this story. So they did this. They set up workshops. The idea was that it was always open to people to see and to copy ideas. And there's a whole backstory of documenting all the different houses where they're transforming them. But then the donor's daughter got in a fight with the brother, and they sued each other, and the whole charity fell apart. The other charity got sort of sanctioned, and it was, for me, the lesson was compromise. This idea that you always try not to compromise at all. You go to all these reviews, and it's always about like non-compromising. Don't compromise on anything. And if you don't compromise is where people, invest into the work to allow for compromise. And this was, I think, the big lesson. And then coming back here was another big lesson, which is the possibility of failure. I don't think it failed architecturally, but it allowed me at least to feel like, it's not such a heroic, I don't think about architecture in such a heroic way anymore. So I kind of come full circle here. So that's the talk. This is the program that we're doing. I have slides of it, but maybe we don't do that now. But you want to see some of Olivier's work, right? Yeah, he's doing a studio. Okay, so I'm doing a program, but yeah, that's him. Yeah. It's doing casting formworks for the factory. And I'm doing something very different. Okay, but yeah, just but I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Sorry,
Yeah, not that broad.
not. Well, I think there's a lot of myths when you go through school, and then there's a lot of myths when you work, and there's a kind of whole standard practice of architecture, and I think it's an interesting moment to begin to question that because of the way the overall economy is and the instability. Oh yeah, this is one of the students that did a film. We went there and they said, okay, what kind of research should we do? I can cut hair, just random. He said, okay, great, we're gonna make films. You go and you cut hair. So he went and he cut people's hair, and then the different ones. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any questions? Comments? Really?
Give it a second. This one, you'll get loads.
It's not the Cooper I know. Like
You'll get loads.
I think you're shocked because people come and say I'm good, and then you kind of just take them down. But I'm coming and I'm saying I'm bad. I'm really bad. Yeah.
Question on how your strategies for approaching the local communities. I saw one of the energy had some fear in it.
So what?
Fear.
Fear.
Yeah, and then also how you kind of like how your reception is in communities. And then I'm curious if like you guys can stay in touch, like what's the relationship or
Yeah, I think you're hinting at it. It's a kind of a human relationship. It's a funny thing, actually, because when you're in the school of architecture, what goes quite far is that you have to be kind of introverted. You have to be willing to sit alone in the dark, after hours, hiding under your table. It's a very inward, monastic lifestyle. But when you go out and you try to actually do architecture, you suddenly realize that you have to basically be the opposite person. I'm myself a very introverted person. I learned through doing projects to communicate. It's like politics. I started to enjoy it, to kind of embrace that idea of working with people. So I think that if you take an interest and you're a good listener, I think that's really important. We often come with a lot of ideas to work with community. Another thing where there's a big thing about, how do you get what's that word? Community participation, something, and yet we never design for it or plan for it. It's because in the reality of it, you already need to do that. So you kind of approach it with a very more receptive position. Does that make sense? Because you anyways need this people. You don't need to show waste. And we do the models because it's like very tangible, and immediately everyone becomes very interested in the first. Since Donald Trump, and the present administration seems to be real estate. China seems to, in my naive readings, the economies of both of these contesting nations, I read that there's a lot of empty cities in China. And you did talk about local intersections with tectonic and doing something connected. Within the larger sort of macro
features between West and East, especially between US and China. What opportunities are there for architects in China now, especially in Western development, right? Either Western or Eastern Guangxi.
Guangxi is like relationships. Okay, so let's see. Jump with that. Okay, so you have too much housing in China and too little in the US. Because all move there. No, I think that one always needs to move forward, and I think it would look very different. I think my interest was when the programming system, not to sort of cling to that, So I know a lot of developers and they try to go back to that model or try to squeeze a little more out of the lemon, or architects feel like they have to, work for a certain kind of office. And then now a lot of students that we had, they start to have their own practices. It becomes much more entrepreneurial, which is interesting. I mean, this program is about involving students not just in the design process, but it's about doing a project over 1 year. And so they're involved in the entire conversation and the creation of a project. So these films actually led to building 2 projects with the villages that were really kind of appropriate, really they felt right. There's a whole process there. And I do think that one has to have a little bit of creativity applied to all these different aspects. So with the US, I'm not that close to it. Yeah, I'm relevant here. But it's hard to say, like maybe it's not housing that they build in China, it's shipping. Tourism is one of the most development. So there's always this need to build. And so when there's need to build, it's really about how you approach that problem. When you get on the train, there's already a path to that, already the summit, where you kind of stand on the summit. I think it's possible. And these things, it's not just like I'm rebellious. It's like we have a saying in Taiwan, if there's a rule that you can break it, if you keep breaking it, it gets easier. And I don't think I can answer your question. It's a bigger political, economic, but I can only say I think architects can and should get involved and be interested in all those layers, larger complexity. It's not just about like what is design. I'm designing the whole thing. Not really answering the question.
Well, I do
Trying not to answer.
secure these was architecture is a political act. And so we need to necessarily deal with that, even though it might take multi-layered forms of this.
Yeah. I think for me, the nice thing is that architecture is fundamentally good, because it involves all these people. When you get funding and people together, they're good. But it always has the possibility to transcend the politics of its own. I think history shows us that. Yeah, so for me, it's different. It's like you have to be politically aware, involved, but it doesn't necessarily mean politics. There's a way of getting involved through architecture. That's what I was trying to say at the beginning, because it's about proposition. It's about bringing people together to change something. We build something, we change something. Yeah. I was gonna say, I think Jacques has a very nice way of so I can steal it, about like instead of sort of democratizing architecture, it's architecturalized democracy. That's said you can ask final interpretation. For me, it kind of means that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really inspiring amount of work. Like, let's say, amount of work. I think it's pretty awesome for students to see this because you're like, mid-career, like that, and you've done a tremendous amount in a pretty short amount of time. And I guess, I wonder if you could reflect a bit on the business model, the extent to which sort of self-apparent to you over time in a more organic way, or it was kind of like, the way they would teach you to do this in business school where you lay out a strategic plan and you follow it. So the kind of business model side of it, and reflect a little bit on the extent to which you feel like the opportunities you created could happen in other places, or how specific they are to this context. Because I think everybody wants to start practicing do this much work, and you talk about work.
Yeah. Okay. For me, I have like two lessons, that I feel like I received. One is to not control things you can't really control. So I spent a lot of time agonized over details that didn't work out the way I thought. And a few times I just wanted to quit architecture and like building like one of cracks and it wasn't that bad. And it was, why was that obsessing or controlling things which really are out of the control? And the other thing is I also try not to do things I don't know anything about. So it's highly collaborative. So, my role as an architect is also to connect, to different people who know things, even other architects, who are really good. I mean, I work with Olivier. He's an amazing architect, with a capital A architect. He's just gonna, we get a project and the next day he has like 5 designs for it. And it's kind of like, but there's also this whole other side. We often debate that, you gotta get people to buy in. There's one thing which why I'm really focused on film is this idea of a story as a very, very compelling strategy, and that goes back to your first question as well, about, connecting people, getting people together. I think architects actually are basically really good storytellers, and can be very good storytellers. It is something I'm very focused on. And that's also because the nature of the complexity of the world means that buildings really aren't enough, because there's many other layers of issues and things, and that might feel confounding, because if you just want to focus on the building, but it also might be liberating if one says, okay, I can actually extend my role into, material and, the idea of programming or, fundraising. There's a lot of layers there. I find that very interesting to say that's all design. So there's no formula, there's no, for strategy that I'm not willing to share, even to myself. But there is a kind of experience. And as I said, it's been evolving a lot.
Also, a follow-up question to Brian's, which is around the context, and I think you touched on the regulations and some of the projects, no handrails or guard. I mean, you just have these balconies or staircases. Just the speed at which these things happen. What is the kind of process? How do you get these things permitted? Do you need the engineer all these wooden structures? Can you just say something about the permitting and regulations?
We follow every regulation. No, we do. Like if you go to Japan, actually, I went to a house in Japan recently designed by a friend of mine. It was amazing. It was like 3 stories, and the handrail was this, and it was just like empty space, you know. And what was even more amazing was the house was designed to have these sloping floor plates. And you're like standing there, and it's like, oh. But, you know, it's weird, you know. Every regulation is different, and I think there are always these gaps. I don't know if you have to study them, but I think they exist, definitely. So, quarantine. I don't know. Yeah,
See
yeah.
how much these things. I think we're just gonna. I think the question was, it's a very different context, like the speed at which these things.
Yeah. But again, I'm not just kind of a little bit, am I lazy or just like a little bit more hands off? You know, I'm really excited about working in a very different kind of design process right now, where I almost try to design as little as possible. You know, like the first project where you kind of sketches or you know, not modeling everything. But then, you know, where's that line? You know, it's about controlling the line between what you control and what you don't. No, we can talk about this later. I mean, I have you been to Dhaka? When you see the Louis Khan, the parliament, fantastic. You know, because you think this guy is like such a, you know, genius. He knew what he was doing. This is his life work, and then you go there and people tell you the stories, and there's so much stuff that's just pure chance, like these lines, which was the way they were building the scaffolding. They were leaving these gaps, and instead of filling them in, it was like, oh, just leave them, and it really saves the project. Or this entire shelf of roofs for the parliament. So they were already building up. They were just trying to fire him because he couldn't commit to the roof structure. And you see a lot of them, and they're very consistent with the rest of the design. And then the final one looks like a different architect did it, and it really works. It's magical because you walk in and this thing is just like, you know, it's like some parametric thing. So, I mean, that's hard to do, I think. You know, it's hard to do when you have a plan and to allow it to be changed or to be a little bit uncertain. I actually think that's hard to do. Because people tell you you're not supposed to do that. I guess, I don't know, let's not make this a therapy session. That's, yes, please.
Especially I'm teaching 2.0 in Beijing.
Oh,
I happen to be today.
yeah.
And I'm completely not expert. So I'm asking kind of naive question because I come across some totally non-professional works like Jane Jacobs. Yeah, she fight with the zoning authority in New York City, and then he moved to Toronto because she doesn't like New York City zoning laws. But from what you said, since you kind of do not always kind of detailed design, but seems need more opportunity to natural emergence. So I just wonder, do you see some connections with this Jane Jacobs theory of, of course you are in the rural settings, but is there some reason I ask is there's this Japanese philosopher, Koji Karatani Kakao, who wrote about architecture as a metaphor.
Okay.
And they try to talk about architectural will and how the architectural will was frustrated in the process of building. But then there's
No. I get it. Yeah.
It just happened to my mind when listening to the talk.
Can I just respond to your last statement? Architecture is metaphor.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's really simple. Architecture is process. Yeah. You know, it's really just, you know, it's a way of acting. in the world. It's a way of practice. It's a verb. I can still not really like buildings, but I can, for the time being, call myself an architect. But I think that process is very interesting. But I think it's happening. I think there's so much conversation. I also see really interesting practices. I mean, what you guys are doing with situ, and you guys are doing this, like, to find other ways to make use of this amazing education, I think, and these amazing skills. No matter how digitized the world gets, it's still very fundamentally spatial. They asked this AI guy, and they said, "Hey, what's the best job?" AI is going to take over everything. And I forget who said it. He's like, "A plumber. You should be a plumber." That's an architect. No, I used to really think. I went to the art school first, and a lot of times when I have like these moments of weakness, I think, "Oh, I should have been an artist." And then, in the 80s, this kind of world of finance caught up with art when they started to sort of, what is it, like, they started to bet on, they started to like have art futures, the art and the cost that it would be. And that moment, art, which fundamentally cannot have a function, all that stuff that we kind of painted architecture land, like the toilets and plumbing, and how it has to work. It had no defense against this other world that just totally consumed it. And so, again, I remain very positive about, what it means to be an architect and why the world needs architecture. And I think there is a lot of territory to explore with that.
Good question. How fundamental was your engineering experience here in your architecture?
Yeah, absolutely. I will actually say some comments about it later. But okay, one thing. I remember taking a course with Professor Wolf, who does the modern physics. It's like the Wolf of Astor Place. And we did the whole proof of Einstein, the big theorem. And he just takes leaps, huge conjectures, actually. And then later you find out that when he was 16, he was sent to a school in Switzerland, which was run by a headmaster that had developed a technique for helping students visualize problems. And then he becomes, the first sort of theoretical physicist because he's visualizing or imagining the problem before proving it. I think that's so similar to what architects actually do. It's the one field among the arts. You don't just do it and show it to somebody. You basically have to sell it, but you have to conceive it. And by the time the building or whatever it is done, it's finished. So there's this whole thing in the education about that, the abstraction and the concrete, that I remember very well. I wasn't conscious of it, It's kind of, I think there's a term, the imagination and pragmatism, kind of pragmatic imagination. And that's, like I said, I didn't learn something from engineering. I felt it was exactly the same in art, engineering, or architecture. For me, it was exactly the same creative ethos. That was my experience. Physics is amazing.
Project that you think was like the most fun, or that you're like most proud of, why, and
5,000 euros. No, really, really. I mean it sincerely because it's destroyed this myth, that if I had more money, my donor was more generous, I had a better developer, or, the architecture could be better, or I could have, done more, right? I could have realized more, or it could have been more. I like the constraints, and it's not really about money. And I think what's nice about architecture and why I like that project is that it's way to transmute value, and then back to this whole thing of the art and finance and speculation. I mean, this world that we live in, I think architecture has the unique ability to still be able to argue for another form of value. I didn't show a project, which was a hospital or health center, and the cost of putting in an elevator was exactly the same cost as putting in a ramp. So we built the ramp. And then we built the ramp. We didn't know there was an old people's home across the street. And they started to use the hospital's ramp for exercise, especially on rainy days. And then kids would come, and what seemed like just, it spatialized something that was just purely functional. I mean, Young Ho Chang, he likes to say, can't do anything without 30% circulation. So it's like being squeezed. It's the inefficiency that is the space for playing. So that ambiguity, I think, because I think architecture has been forced into a kind of formulaic, assessment. And I personally don't like the idea of program, like programming or this kind of thing, like what's your program? So you lay out the program as a means not to really design, but to justify the floor plan or something. Program can mean many different things. Okay, sorry about the lecture, but that was the one. That was the one because it was surprising. We walked in, completely changed our idea. We had to kind of react,
Is it money or is it funding from the local governments? Like, how does that?
There was an earthquake. I forget where the money came from, a charity.
Sure.
Yeah, and then we got the books and stuff from another charity. Yeah.
How they change that from how
Yeah.
I mean, you're mentioned it here again, but film, the motivation and like seems like they're extremely and to make a project. Form of motivation for you saying yes, this one out of that. Or yes, the bulk not of that. Yes, not of the water. It's the water, but how did the filmmaking and motivation to shoot on project over another late? Or does the film have some agency or motivation?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I understand. I think I could say there's two things though. Yeah, I'm kind of like a yes person, kind of like, yeah, terrible, the motivation, I'm not that busy. I like to have a lot of time to not do anything. I forget who said like boredom is the key to, creativity. I think it is very important. The other thing, which I think is, which recently I've been thinking about, is not me, but Inaki Avalos was there in Hong Kong, and he has a great book, The Good Life, and that's where I got kind of inspired to do house tour. You know this? Not me, but he's like Juan Ferrero's ex-part. The book is great, and he's, you either know him as a really prolific writer, or you might know him as a designer, so amazing designer. And he's very interested in this thing, like you write and you design. And that's a way to get clarity across. So, you sort of write about whatever it is, right? It's kind of separate. And then you do whatever it is. And I started to get really interested in this. I built that into the program to some degree. So the film, I think, operates like that, that it's a kind of parallel design process. So in the last semester, we had Dean Simpson and Christopher Roth. They came to teach electives, one with drawing and one through film. And they worked with students on their project, their site. So the site was a building, a design for a building, and then they made a film about, the making of that building or that site, and then they made a drawing about it. And each kind of brought this layer of understanding to the context that I think they feed each other. So that's how I start to think about film. Yeah. And a lot of it's like a tool for clarity, for insight, or for another view.
What are you doing to come in this game on? What are you doing?
Okay. My title originally was called The Peep Show. Yeah, it's The Peep Show. It's inspired by this great photo that comes from New York. I don't know if you know this photo. It's from 1971, and there's this wall. It's like a kind of a wooden wall, and there are these circles in it. And you have this row of men with hats,
Yeah.
and they're peeking in. And it's actually a construction site. And I tried to find out what that construction site was. And it was this weird, like public, urban, but like very private thing that people were just doing on the street. And so I'm working with a filmmaker, a historian, a robotic technological optimist, and a technological pessimist. And it's like the five of us, and I'm just like, I'm coordinating. And we're constructing this. We found these, like these lazy Susans.
Yes.
Okay, so we needed a big one that is mechanized. So we found a manufacturer in China, and it's this gigantic circle steel structure that rotates, and then here's the models. And you peep in, and there's these different stories. So one is the transformation of the underground house. So it's interesting because back to the film thing, we're working with a filmmaker, but the entire creative process is filming. So we're basically making a film. It's a storyboard. It's a lot of things. It's like zoom up, close up, but then we are representing it as a series of models. Using a Chinese dining mechanism to power the whole thing. So I hope it's going to be delicious. So I'm not supposed to give it away that much, but Carlo Rappi's a bit.
Will it be featured?
It's called Round and Round and Round. So you could, you just stay there all day. Yeah. Like the ghost of Rudolphsky will be in there as a puppet. Yeah. Yeah. It's something I'm really fascinated with this person. Fantastic, really. Because you couldn't really pin down, what he was. He had this shoe company. I tried to get shoes from him. He designed the fantastic shoes. And it was operating for 20, 30 years because he did a study of all different types of sandals. And it's pretty much amazing, that every culture has an idea of tying a piece of leather to your foot. And every culture does it differently. But he just kind of like commercialized. That was his big business. He didn't as much as an art. Yeah. What how you thought? Okay. Jesse, you're looking really tired. Yeah.
The thing I was going to ask you about was you can say more about this expression of efficiency. It's really is that it's just not it's like kind of being I'm to make export it. Don't want it.
What was the second time?
That's like it's order. Should see certified. I think you should see as a formal term. Young ratios. So they were quality because they it should already here. So it's pretty quick. So I'm wondering, I don't know what you're saying about that you should see. Some order seem to it's okay. It should be better. We do it from this.
My little secret is that I don't use the word inefficiency. I talk to somebody that doesn't sound very good. I use ambiguity there. You know, it's true. I think there's actually a really interesting case for which things don't have fixed functions. You know, or that they're different kinds of things. Yeah, I think we don't talk about is housing, you know, research, you know, and about like the idea of partitions. Yeah, so I do think there's a general sort of reaction, resistance to a lot of terminology and ways of thinking about buildings that, you know, 10 years ago, I mean, there was a lot of things where you would sit in a review, people would say, well, we should really, we have to learn how developers think. And that was like a big thing. You know, we're going to be a good architect, we're going to be a good architecture school. We have, okay. And again, and I understood it then. I think there's also some questioning of that, because obviously, if they were that smart, they wouldn't be collapsing. And, you know, it's still, you can't escape the profit thing, but I think there is also the disjunction, you know, between what is offered and what is needed, you know, and I think ambiguity is actually more and more needed, you know, in terms of use. It has nothing to do with profits. If you go to Japan, the way that in terms of hotels and things are working, or a big lesson for me was to go to Hong Kong, and you go to Shanghai, and you literally are like, oh my God, they built this modernist projects that everyone told us was going to fail because it failed in Europe. You know, people are anti-social. You know, but then it's packed. You know, all the hallways are full of shops, and you know, it wasn't the model. It was like the relationship between the model of the architecture and the cultural aspect of it. I think that's where for me it's actually become very interesting. These Tibetan houses are not enclosed in the usual sense because they're used to the idea that animals live in those, and the heat from the animals, the methane gas, permeates upward, and then it continues upward, and they have a stove, and so they need to leave the roof open because then they have dry meat, and so you have this kind of this differential of temperature that is moving. This goes totally counter to what we struggle with in terms of thinking about having to design for climate comfort, you know, which is through insulation, you know, constant. And it's not just because they're villagers. There's some really intelligent things going on where there's like heat dissipating, you know, into like 3 or 4 layers in which different kinds of activities take place, and we're kind of documenting it. And it's very interesting. It's very scientific, even.
You got to play exercise. Thank you so much.